And welcome back, everyone. This is Nick Lamparelli. This is Profiles in Risk. And today we're going to be talking to Nick and Josh from Project Canary. It's pretty much a push of ours to talk about things that are related to climate change and tie it back to insurance. And I can't think of a better way to start that than with Project Canary and what specifically they're doing. So, Nick, Josh, welcome.
Thanks,
Thank
Nick.
you.
Thanks for having us.
So I'm going to, Nick, I'm going to start with you. We start all of these conversations allowing our guests to introduce themselves. Nick, why don't you start and introduce yourself, also introduce Project Canary, and then we'll switch over to Josh.
Sounds great. My name is Nick Fekula. I work in corporate strategy on our strategy and finance team here at Project Canary. My role is broadly explained by closely working with our executive leadership team to kind of ideate and execute in some of our strategic vision for the company. So what is Project Canary? We are a climate technology company that offers an enterprise emissions data platform to help companies identify, measure, understand, and act to reduce their emissions across the energy value chain. Our mission really is to approach this with sophisticated software solutions to help companies improve, report, and really understand their emissions footprint, right? So that's the data side of what we do. On top of that, we have an environmental risk assessment that I can actually turn over to Josh to first introduce himself and explain that environmental risk assessment, which I think will be particularly interesting for today's conversation.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate that. I'm Joshua Zier. I've worn a few different hats here at Project Canary. My current title is Lead Technical Expert, Upstream and Special Projects, but I've spent much of my time here working on and developing our TrustWell environmental assessment program. It's been quite a journey to get to where we are, but excited to speak to everyone here today.
So we're trying to tie this to insurance. So before we do that, can you guys discuss how you are engaging? Like what are the industries you are engaged with now? I think that will tee it up nicely for why an emissions related company in insurance should be kind of thought together in a particular way. So what are the industries you have a clientele now, and what, maybe go into a little bit of detail of like what are you actually doing for them?
Sure. So as I mentioned, we're kind of approaching this across the entire energy value chain. We've started with first upstream oil and gas operators. We've moved into midstream. We've moved into public utilities. And now we're working with carbon sequestration projects and firms as well. So kind of approaching this from, what are the highest emitting industries and where can we really add the most value to these industries?
Yeah. Can you define upstream and midstream? Maybe
Sure.
even there's probably a downstream.
Sure. Upstream is the production of oil and gas. So that's, pulling the commodity out of the earth. Midstream is the transportation of that commodity to the downstream, which is things like refineries who are, refining the product, and the consumers of the natural gas and oil. So that's kind of the very broad scope definition.
Yeah. And let's stick with the upstream just for a second. Again,
Sure.
everyone, I will link these to insurance, but let's learn a little bit about what is actually happening in this space. So upstream, you have the drillers, right? Or the folks that are, like, as you said, taking the commodity out of the ground. If you ask, I think, the layperson about that, they would say it's probably pretty messy type of operation. That would be my guess as well, and that's why in some ways, like, we really need to capture how messy is it. Can you talk about like that part of it? How messy is this? I know if you go to your website, it talks a lot about methane, and we are talking a lot about natural gas here. Um, how do when I think of a pool of gas in the ground, I keep thinking about, well, if they plug a hole in it, it's all just going to disappear. So it's going to be messy, but how do they actually capture it, and how messy is it?
Sure. Josh, I think we can rely on your engineering expertise for this one.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that. So I didn't get into this in my background, but I did spend the majority of my career on drilling rigs. So from '09 to 15 in the Bakken in North Dakota for onshore assets, and then Deepwater Gulf of Mexico, 2015 to 2017. So spent some time around that entire process. And I think it's an exciting question, Nick. To your point, it can be messy. I mean, and to fully understand the environmental impacts, community impacts, both from an emissions perspective, a water perspective, and then obviously a safety community perspective, it really creates an interesting picture, if you will. So you obviously have your drilling rig and its operations there. After that, you come in and bring in a completions crew where we do fracking. And for quite possibly the majority of people that are going to listen to this, they probably remember when fracking was just getting going and the onshore shale boom really took off, and the questions surrounding fracking and the safety behind it. Was it safe? Was it not? What was going into that? So, I mean, there's that picture. And then obviously, once an asset is drilled and completed, you have 30 years of production where an operator
Hmm.
is constantly producing some hydrocarbon from that asset, along with potentially water, and you have to do things with that as well. So it can be a messy cycle. The industry has certainly evolved in a lot of ways, and in other ways, there's a lot of opportunity. Um, to go back just slightly to your earlier question is what do we do for the companies that work with us? It really depends. What we're trying to do is differentiate. We don't view oil and gas as everybody operates on the same equal plane. What we've seen
Hmm.
is that some operators, some clients are very focused on environmental stewardship, others not so much. So some operators come to us and they want to differentiate, others want help on how to improve their environmental performance.
Yeah. And I think it gets to the crux of the insurance part because it can be messy. Um, I think many folks who are, we'll call them environmentally concerned, may say something like, well, we don't need a Project Canary. We should just be shutting these things down completely. Can you talk a little bit about the impracticality of that and why, because it's impractical, that brings the value proposition of Project Canary to light? Because if they're going to be around, we want them to be as clean as possible.
Sure, and I can comment on that. And the reality is fossil fuels make up 80 to 90% of the energy consumption around the world. So we really have taken the stance that we understand the importance of fossil fuels in the energy transition, and we understand to get to a future state of a fully renewable uh, energy ecosystem, we need fossil fuels to take us there. So while we're in this energy transition, we really want to help oil and gas operators, one, operate in the most environmentally friendly way, two, differentiate themselves so they have the ability to continue operating uh, and thinking about things like environmental stewardship and what are we putting into the atmosphere. We know that the gases that are emitted as a byproduct of this process are extremely harmful to the climate, right? So how can we kind of help these operators operate in the most environmentally friendly way, and kind of take us to the future reality of a fully renewable energy ecosystem?
Yeah. Yeah, and specifically, again, going back to your website, there's a lot of discussion around methane in particular, which is a natural gas and very abundant. Also, very much cleaner than oil products that need to be converted into different kinds of combustible products. Can you talk about methane itself, natural gas, methane, any of the natural gases that you guys are quantifying emissions for, and talk about the specific physics and chemistry of that? Because when we think of climate change and we think of greenhouse gases, it's almost predominantly carbon dioxide. But methane has its own particular characteristics, which are more severe. Can you go into the physics chemistry of methane?
Sure. So we started with methane because the reality is it's the most prevalent fugitive emission in upstream gas production specifically. We've since moved to monitor for other greenhouse gases, but methane is kind of the core of our business, right? The reason it is because methane has a global warming potential of a minimum of 25 times to up to 100 times, depending on the time frame that you're assessing that global warming potential of carbon dioxide. So we've kind of started with methane because it is kind of so much more potent than carbon dioxide, even though carbon dioxide is also around as a fugitive emissions from the production of oil and gas. But we started with methane, and you're kind of seeing that focus in the policy space as well. In 2024, you're going to see this methane fee, which will be, tacked on to kind of some of these super emitter or large emissions events from oil and gas production, right? So you're seeing this focus from, policy alike because they recognize the potency of the gas and as it relates to carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases.
Yeah, and just to maybe build on that a touch, I mean, to the original kind of nexus of the question there, you're absolutely right. Methane has been proven to be a much cleaner source of energy production than, say, coal or potentially some other options. However, the key word or the key kind of attribute to that is when it's kept in the pipe. When methane is emitted, to Nick F's point earlier, its potency is through the roof compared to a CO2, 25x up to potentially 100x, depending on what GWP timeline you want to put on it. So once it escapes, it's extremely harmful. But when it's kept in the pipes and when it's kept where it should be and used as it needs to be, it can be extremely efficient. So that's really what we're trying to help operators do as well.
Yeah. And I think we're getting to the crux of the insurance aspect of why are we having this discussion in an insurance discussion. It's because we, as Nick said, we're going to still need fossil fuels. So if we're going to use them, we might as well transition society to the cleaner versions of it and ditch the messier ones. But if we switch to the cleaner ones, like a methane and some of the natural gases, we want to tap them and contain them and not let them escape because they are more potent than carbon dioxide. So it really creates an opportunity to use an insurance characteristic, of indemnification, and also use a technology like that Project Canary has to essentially be able to rank organizations, companies on, okay, well, how well are you tapping in? How well are you containing this thing and getting it downstream so that we can use it in the most effective way possible for society. Can you talk a little bit about the insurability? Like you guys are seeing a cross section of many different types of companies, and you guys can actually put, I'll call it a stamp of approval. You guys tell me how you do this, but it's almost like a blue ribbon stamp of approval for companies who are highly focused. It also seems like a oxymoron, but fossil fuel companies who are climate conscious, who are looking to use best practices, the most modern techniques to be able to tap into these reservoirs of natural gas and contain them and get them all the way to where it becomes the combustible product that we need to kind of run society. Can you talk about what separates, talk about these companies, these cross section, what companies that are highly focused on making sure they're doing the right things? What are those right things? What are they doing? And how does Project Canary examine them and score them, that type of thing?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nick. And I think this is one that Josh Zier can answer with the trust well assessment and kind of how we're looking at environmental best practices. What's the industry standard? Are operators above or below that threshold? So, Josh, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Yes, let me bounce back really quick to kind of the blue ribbon stamp of approval, if you will. I think it's a fair analogy. What we like to think of ourselves and what we're providing is more of like a bond rating, almost like the equivalent to a Moody's or something like that, where we go through when an operator engages with us to do our trust well assessment. What that means is they are providing thousands upon thousands of policy plan execution documentation pages. There's subject matter expert interviews. We actually take one of our Project Canary engineers and send them to the location itself, to each location. So we're actually putting, the boots on the ground metaphor, if you will, to each and every one of these. So it's not a spot check. It's a whole on or holistic, review of operations start to finish. And we don't give a grade to anybody who hasn't executed already. And what I mean by that is an operator can't come to us and say, we're going to drill this well, and we're going to do all these things. Please give us our rating. No, you have to execute on that. And I think that's a big differentiator for us is not only do you have to plan it, you then have to do it if you're going to achieve those higher scores. So what we provide is both a level of rating. Currently it's platinum, gold, silver, and rated. But we also have a numerical score value in there. So we have our buckets or our score ranges that each one of those kind of applies to. But even within a gold rating, say, there may be differentiation based on that numerical score. And we provide an overall score, we provide an air score, a water score, a land score, and a community score. Because even though methane is the focus right now, and it will continue to be for at least my lifetime, I'm fairly confident saying that, everything else matters too. When you step into an area where there's significant drought, or if you're in a high population density area, which are things that I believe the insurance companies would care about, there are additional risks and additional steps that need to be taken to really ensure that your operations aren't impacting or are minimizing the amount of impact that they have.
Yeah. And so there's been news recently, just in the past 2-3 years, of insurance companies first declaring, hey, we're not going to insure fossil fuel companies.
Yep.
And then they've had to kind of take that back, right? And so, reality being what it is, I think it sounded like a great idea, especially from a publicity standpoint early on, like, oh, we will no longer insure them. But then to your point, Josh, you just said it, in our lifetime, it's impractical, right? Like we're going to need these sources of energy if society is going to function. And, what is the mission of the insurance industry? It is to take on risk. And what better way to help society than to help it manage its energy production going forward in the cleanest way possible. So it creates opportunities for insurance companies to put their money where their mouth is. They can still be environmentally conscious, still insure energy companies, but use technologies such as Project Canary to score and to, I don't know, I would say kind of like embedded into an underwriting process of, are you an organization? Are you a company that's using all of the available technologies and all of the available risk management techniques, tools that exist to make sure that you're minimally impacting the environment, right? So it creates that opportunity for insurance companies to really encourage a better way of energy production.
I totally agree. And I wouldn't even limit it to just insurance company. I know that's the purpose and the audience today, but you saw this with ESG investing. You've seen this with endowment funds. We're going to pull out of fossil fuels. We're not going to invest anymore in this. But then a reality sets in.
Yeah.
And that reality is like, wait a sec, we need to differentiate, not divest wholly, but we need to differentiate and make sure that our funds are going where they need to be. This might be a silly analogy, but one of the ways I like to think about it, what it feels like to me, I wasn't there for this, but how I imagine it felt was back when Kennedy declared we're going to land on the moon by the end of the decade. And then all of a sudden there was about 5 or 6 years where people went, how exactly are we going to do this? So it's that, yeah, we're going to get out of fossil fuels. We're going to encourage additional investment. And now we're in that step of like, okay, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do the energy transition? How are we going to meet the needs of our stakeholders, our investors, offset or reduce our liabilities as insurance companies in an evolving world? How are we going to do that? And the answer that we believe is with really transparent, high fidelity, and frequent data across all environmental metrics.
Yeah. Plus, if we can create a blueprint to be able to do something like this, it sounds like you guys are exposed to organizations or companies that are highly conscious, right? So they're of course they're partnering with Project Canary, right? But they're at a very high level in how they're thinking about it, the investments and the resources they're putting in to risk management. We know that there have to be companies that aren't doing those sorts of things. And what to me, what seems really interesting about this particular technology is that if the insurers can really incentivize this, essentially, hey, if you're not using this kind of technology, we can't insure you because we have no idea what you're doing to the environment. So we can only take on, when insurers insure, they want to take on the good risks, right? This creates an opportunity for, well, I'll call them the sloppy companies. It might be the wrong word for
Yeah.
it, but I'm going to call them the sloppy companies. It gives an opportunity for the sloppy companies. It gives them a blueprint as well to like, oh my God, we can't work on future projects because we're not going to be able to get them insured. We have to start thinking about how do we get up to that level of standards just so we can get insurance so we can actually do these things. For those folks that are listening who are environmentally conscious and are thinking about like, geez, I would just prefer anyone not work with fossil fuel companies. I wanna kind of illustrate that this creates a pathway where we can turn sloppy companies into non-sloppy companies. The insurance aspect of this creates a vehicle for us to really clean up a lot of stuff. Again, back to Josh, it's like not in our lifetimes is this going to end. Like, can we think of these in stages? Can we get them from sloppy to non-sloppy? When you guys think of this, are you thinking it in that way as well? Like, I know you want to work with companies who are already like patting themselves on the back, but this is a really interesting technology and as a vehicle to get the sloppy companies into a position where they're sound and they can then pat themselves on the back. It almost seems like this is the inevitable evolution of the upstream companies and the midstream, but the upstream ones of like, hey, we need to show our work. We need to show, hey, we're here to make money, but we need to show that we're clean and we need to show that we're not sloppy.
Yeah, Nick, I think you said it really well. I think this is a great opportunity for the insurance industry to incentivize fossil fuel companies operating in the clean, most environmentally friendly way that they possibly can, right? By just not insuring the space completely or not investing in the space completely, as Josh mentioned, you're actually disincentivizing these companies to operate in a way that might be more environmentally friendly.
Mm-hmm.
So by it's kind of hey, let's do this the right way. You will be insurable because we understand that you are considering these risks that we're also concerned about. And we really think this is a great opportunity for the insurance industry to make a real impact, particularly in this space.
Yeah, you can raise the floor, right? There's a ceiling
Mm-hmm.
and there's a floor, and the insurance companies have a chance to really raise that floor and narrow
Yeah.
that gap.
Yeah. I really love that. And I'm thinking of, in the past couple of years, there was that, hey, we're not going to insure these companies, and they're, kind of pulling it back. My expectation would be they're not going to give it all back. Like we are not going back to the 1980s in how insurance companies were insuring these organizations, these companies, these projects. We're not going back to those times. So it sounds like there's still going to be companies who are going to be deemed uninsurable. They're just too sloppy, right? And so this kind of technology, like this to me, incentivizes them as well. Like we can't get insurance, so we're going to have to clean this stuff up. It to me it creates an opportunity for them to figure out risk management techniques and risk management transfer options. Like they may not have a choice. They may have to take on some of the risk themselves and figure out mechanisms to insure themselves or to retain some of that risk. But if they know that they're sloppy, they're not going to want to retain that. So they're going to want to lift that floor up just for their sake so that they're unburdening themselves of some of the risk that they're taking. Seems like this is not just for this conversation's about insurance companies, but this could just also mean the upstream and midstream companies who are just uninsurable and have to figure out a way to become insurable to partner with Project Canary on getting them. You guys could find a pathway for them to insurability.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of the power of our kind of twofold offering is, one, we can start with this environmental assessment that's saying, at a baseline, here is how an operator functions, right? What are their risk mitigation strategies? What processes do they have in place? How are they compared to maybe an industry standard? And then, with our environmental assessment process, we're continually reviewing how those things change through time. We're layering in technologies to understand what's actually happening from an emission standpoint on an asset by asset basis, and being able to measure, the continual improvement, via monitoring for methane emissions on a pad, or pulling in data from flyovers to see what emissions are active across an entire asset base, comparing that to a continual reassessment of the processes that are in place, being able to kind of work with operators to go down this pathway to real improvement that in turn makes them more insurable, and kind of puts them in that category of being industry leaders in terms of environmental stewardship.
And perhaps one of the things that we haven't touched on, and maybe we should, is one of the unique aspects of Project Canary in particular is really in our engineering expertise, and the fact that all the team members that we have on our environmental assessment side have all not only have degrees in engineering, but have industry experience. And why this matters, in my view, is that a lot of times companies obtain data. Pick any industry, it doesn't matter. It doesn't just have to be oil and gas. Data. But then nobody knows what to do with it. You can collect all this, you have this, and it's stored here, and that's great. But at some point, you need to act on that. And so within Project Canary, it's not just that you have monitoring data; it's that we can help provide those environmental insights. We can provide recommendations, structure, emissions allocation ideas, things of that nature. Things even towards carbon accounting. But the point in all this is that we can actually provide actionable items to help an operator, not just data, but actual advice.
Yeah. Josh, you just defined business intelligence,
Right. Yeah.
right? And
Yes.
it's so true. I mean, you see these companies collecting like an enormous amounts of data, and then you like, what are you doing with it? The data by itself is like the raw oil, to use a upstream analogy. Until you turn it into something, it's just messy and occupies a lot. Um, you know, I think another aspect you guys brought up early on was carbon capture, right? So, do you envision, could there be a future world where natural gas still plays a big component of our, the a large proportion of our energy production, but we have from A to Z, from the tapping of the field all the way to the capture, to the containment, to the actual combusting of this and the capturing of the carbon. Do you envision a world where the engineering gets to a particular point, we can go A to Z, and there's almost no impact, no methane escapes, no carbon dioxide gets released? It's all contained in some kind of set of vehicles or vessels. Is that world achievable?
I think particularly in North America, the US and Canada mainly, the emphasis on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, the commitments from companies outside of the oil and gas sector to get to carbon neutrality by 2030, 2035, whatever date they've put on it. I think the carbon sequestration element will be critical in obtaining those objectives, and the integrity of that system, integrity at like actual mechanical integrity, reducing leaks, etc., will be instrumental and crucial in validating those net zero claims. And the
Yeah.
only way to do that is to measure with a variety of technologies: satellite, drone, flyover,
Yeah.
continuous sensors, etc.
Yeah. And that's how I see, like, when I think of what kind of benefit can the insurance industry bring to climate change, to the evolution of our energy production? It's that, like when you, Josh, as you describe that kind of world, it's like the technology will be there, the engineering will be there, the desire for society to do that will be there. It will be, I think, a necessity. Like if the insurance industry wants to know, how do we participate in this to make a cleaner world? That, exactly that. Allow the technology to mature and be there to indemnify on the back end when things go wrong, when things don't go as smoothly as planned, be there. And that will create all of the incentive in the world to create that roadmap for us to get to a cleaner energy, cleaner, less carbon, cleaner society, less pollution in so many different ways. Am I right?
I agree.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay. Can't think of a better way to end it on such a positive note. That's what we're gonna do, guys.
Perfect.
So Josh, Nick from Project Canary, I will put their connections, their LinkedIn connections, and the homepage in the show notes for this particular episode. So if you're listening, don't pull off the road and to write this down. It'll be on the show notes. But Josh, Nick, thank you so much, and good luck in trying to get more organizations to help us clean the environment.
Great. Thank you, Nick. We really appreciate you having us.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Thanks, guys.